an isolated incident in the Saskatoon Brigade.
Hello, I'm Dick Brennan. Thanks for joining us for a look back, a CBS News New York series where we dig deep into our archives to revisit our coverage of memorable moments in history. Today we're going back to 1999. It was the last year of the 20th century and everyone was looking forward to what the new millennium would bring. But along with excitement came big concerns of a major computer flaw experts called Y2K, or the millennium bug. People feared the switch from the year 99 to 00 would create havoc on computer programs, affecting everything from airline reservations to financial databases to government systems. The result? Panic. People at home stockpiled dried goods and bottled water. Banks and businesses developed emergency plans. And CBS 2 News was there for it all. Let's take a look back at how we first covered the start of this phenomenon. CBS News New York's Barbara Nevins had these reports.
We may have power brownouts, trouble getting our medical records, using ATMs, and doing our grocery shopping due to temporary food shortages, although grocery store chains downplayed that this morning.
Unless there is widespread hoarding or excessive stockpiling, January 1st, 2000 will be a routine shopping day.
One major concern is in health care. The report's authors say 90% of doctors haven't fixed their computers yet.
These medical delivery systems are in trouble, that they are not prepared to respond to the Y2K issues.
What about air travel?
I'm not going to fly with the year 2000 problem. It's too dangerous to me.
The FAA admits they got a late start in tackling the problem. 38% of the nation's airports don't have a Y2K plan. But officials say for the most part, you'll be able to get around, even if you're a little late.
There may be some minor glitches, perhaps a bag belt system somewhere at some airport has a chip in it and didn't get reprogrammed. But I don't think you're going to have anything of any major significant proportion.
I spoke with Brian Cohen, the head of the mayor's Y2K office, a 30-person task force designed to tackle the Y2K problem here in New York City. He says the city's getting ready for any potential power brownouts.
Well, we're very well prepared for things like this. I mean, we've dealt with these problems in the past, and we are communicating very closely with Con Edison, and they're giving us levels of assurances that the services will continue.
And AT&T here in New York is ahead of the game. They were certified Y2K compliant at the end of last year.
They can rest assured their calls will go through and their bills will arrive.
Tino Scarpa has been in the New York restaurant business for 20 years. When he recently decided to open a new one, his son talked him into calling it Tino.com, complete with a website. It's young, hip, he told his dad. Now Tino's faced with a potentially catastrophic computer crisis, Y2K.
I was definitely confused. The computers, I just started learning about 6-7 months ago, just before I got into this business.
At his son's suggestion, Tino brought in experts to make sure his computers would read the year 2000. The expert we called says now Tino and others like him must worry about their suppliers' computers.
If he doesn't receive his deliveries on time, you're not going to receive your deliveries on time, and you can see the domino effect.
You could lose your business.
Absolutely.
HealthEnd says with only 11 months till the millennium, many businesses will not be able to reprogram or replace all their computers. His company helps them develop contingency plans. For instance, make hard copies of all important computer records. Call banks and suppliers to find out if their computers are ready for Y2K. You may want to get qualified year 2000 legal advice concerning the contracts you have with them. And look for free advice, even aid from the feds on the internet. Finally, be on the lookout for scams.
The advice is always the same. Get a second opinion. With the year 2000, it's the same thing. If you hear somebody saying how you may go out of business unless you get them on board.
Or unless you get a certain kind of insurance.
Exactly. It's worthwhile to get a second opinion.
Now, it's safe to say that just 2 days before the year 2000 rang out, many people had concerns about how Y2K would impact their money. It also led panicked Americans to stock up on supplies for their homes. Here's what's happened as the new year quickly approached.
After all the hype and worry, the much-anticipated Y2K is only 54 hours away. It's too late to build that bunker in the desert, but the experts say there are several things you can do to protect yourself, especially your money.
Well, the first thing you do is get your bank statements, photocopy them, have a copy nearby. The second thing to do is to check your bank balance, just to make sure that you can justify it with whatever it is on January 3rd when the banks open again.
Lauren Young, a writer for Smart Money magazine, says there's really no need to stock up on extra cash, but she says the system is ready if you want to make that last-minute run.
The banks have actually got a lot of extra cash on hand right now. The Federal Reserve has pumped something upwards of $100 billion into the banking system. So banks are very ready for this, and they've got the cash if you need it.
We went over to Citibank on Broadway and 56 to see if there was any last-minute run on cash. There wasn't.
I was thinking about doing it, but I didn't think it was worth it.
I just got out of the Army, and as far as I know, everything's well taken care of, because from a government standpoint, they made sure the FDIC had everything taken care of with the banks. So the money's pretty well safe where it is.
The government and businesses have spent billions to become Y2K reliant. Experts advise homeowners to have a short list of items on hand just in case there is an emergency. That list includes bottled water, medicine, non-perishable foods, cash, emergency phone numbers, a first aid kit, and a flashlight. At Gristides Supermarket on the Upper West Side, Supervisor Barry Farber says there's been a big run on bottled water and other goods.
A lot of batteries, a lot of flashlights, things like that, you know, to make sure in case electricity goes out in their house.
Well, 20 years later, looking back, it's hard to wrap our minds around that. Get your bottled water and your batteries. Here to help us put it all into perspective is technology expert and CBS Sunday Morning correspondent David Pogue. David, thanks for joining us. It's funny watching these pieces, not just the haircuts, but the computers. But it is interesting. They did have places you can get money back then, back in 2000. You know, I was like, ATMs, really? Okay. I just got to ask you, what did you experience in the days leading up, both personally and professionally?
I mean, it's just pure comedy at this point. I mean, it's like when we look at pictures of the earliest newsreels and everything was black and white and jerky. I mean, it's like, that was us. It was, you know, a media firestorm. Reporters didn't know whether it was real or not, so they went with, you know, what bleeds sells or whatever. So what I experienced was just the same thing as everybody else. I was just about to start this job writing a technology column for the New York Times. So I was monitoring it closely, but reading out what all the experts were saying. And of course, the experts were split. There were people saying this is going to be bank shutdown, military shutdown, aircraft shutdown. And then there were people saying it's really not that big a deal. So I just held my breath and waited to see.
Now, we heard that piece just before recommending, you know, go get the bottle. It sounded like something that a blizzard was coming, you know. get
bottled water? How is that going to help you? I don't.
They didn't include the bread and eggs, which is usually what we get. But does anything stand out to you? Companies spend so much money, they spend so much time. You mentioned it in passing, worried about the banks, et cetera. Any specific preparations stick out to you except for the bottled water?
I mean, we have to remember that to this day, nobody knows why the world didn't end. There's two really opposing schools of thought. One is that the $300 billion spent to correct the programming code staved off disaster. And then there's the other argument that said most of that was wasted because it was never a big problem to begin with. And the argument for that are countries like South Korea and Russia who did no preparation, and they were fine also. I mean, there were some glitches, but, you know, you could count them on 5 hands. You know, a bus verification ticketing system in Australia didn't work. Cash registers at a 7-Eleven had the wrong date on the receipts. Just little tiny stuff. So probably the answer is a combination of the two things, right? We did some preparation, and it was overblown in the first place.
What, the news business overblows things? I can't believe that. That shocks me to death.
I know, who would say such a thing?
Who would ever think? I know because I'd done a bunch of pieces. I was at a different station, but we were doing all the same pieces here in New York. And I had no clue as to what would happen. And I said to myself, I'll toss a coin and we'll see. I dare put you on the spot, but what did you predict beforehand? What did you think would happen?
I tend to be, throughout life, a non-alarmist. So every time everybody thinks this, you know, I remember when microwaves came out, people said, oh, they'll give everybody cancer. And, you know, when smartphones, oh, our kids will lose the ability to read and write. I mean, just every new development is terrifying to a lot of people. I've lived through enough of it to know usually things are overblown in the fear department. So I didn't think very much would happen. I have to say, I was asked by CNN to come into the Bureau on December 31st and spend the night. Spend 24 hours in the bureau as an on-desk reporter describing these disasters as they came flooding into the bureau, and it didn't pay anything. It was just, you know, supposed to be for the love of the game. And, you know, after a long talk with my family, I decided, you know, it's not what I want to do with my New Year's Eve, and it's probably going to be a waste of time anyway. And it was. Well,
okay. Well, just for that, that's the tease right there. David, stick around, because when A Look Back returns, the clock strikes midnight, ushering in the year 2000. And the big question, did the chaos and mayhem that was predicted happen around the globe? Well, we sort of know the answer, but we're going to let you know coming up next. Sparks flew in Times Square as the ball dropped, and the music group No Doubt sang the REM hit "It's the End of the World as We Know It" on MTV's New Year's Eve Live. That officially signaled the transition from the year 1999 to a new century. It was an exciting time for the crowd there, despite the impending anxiety around the infamous Y2K. I remember because I was standing right there, along with CBS News New York's Lou Young. He takes us back to that very moment.
We'd watched the Millennium March across a dozen time zones as we waited in the center of our world for the year 2000 to arrive. The crowd's made up of people from all over the world, shoulder to shoulder, with New Yorkers from all parts of town. If there were fears hidden in the shadows, they vanished in an instant when midnight arrived, and the spectacle, so carefully prepared, overwhelmed our senses. It was, after all, worth waiting for.
I promised her that I would bring her the year 2000 when the ball dropped.
So how'd you like it?
Oh, fantastic.
Times Square was so jammed with humanity in the final moments of 1999 that would-be revelers were turned away by police from 9 o'clock on. They were packed in security pens from 42nd Street to Central Park South. A party 17 blocks long. If you were there, you'll never forget.
I've been in this country 30 years. This is the happiest day of my life.
Some folks waited here 10, 12, 14 hours for the moment that passed in a flash. And you know, just about all of us on the way home were thinking, what was it we were worried about again? In Times Square in the new millennium, I'm Lou Young, News 2.
Exactly, Lou. So people seem pretty excited in Times Square, but what was happening with the world's computer systems? Did anyone see any effects of Y2K? David Diaz had this report on January 1st, 2000.
Pentagon officials now admit that for several hours into the new year, a military ground station that processes data from U.S. spy satellites shut down as a result of the dreaded bug that gave computers a headache, recognizing that years could start with 20 instead of 19. But that appears to have been the most severe problem in a landscape that overwhelmingly seemed oblivious to a defect thousands of people spent billions of dollars fixing. Today was the first full workday since 1999 became Y2K. And at least here in New York, anyone hoping they'd get an unscheduled day off because of millennium bugs in their workplace computers wound up sadly disappointed.
None of the computer systems had difficulty going from 99 to the year 2000.
Joseph Lauda is the deputy mayor who oversaw the city's gargantuan $350 million program to make sure the turn of the century did not disrupt city operations.
We changed 70 million lines of code in our computer systems. We have 1,100 computer systems that run in the city of New York.
And at the New York Clearinghouse, where on an average day $1.2 trillion in global money is deposited and paid out, the potential disruption created hardly a stir. And that was good news for a lot of people's pocketbooks, including those receiving Social Security checks.
Anybody that gets direct deposit of pay, if we had a serious problem where we couldn't deliver the items to the banks or the banks couldn't post those items, they would be affected by that.
In fact, throughout the world, financial transactions move smoothly, with only minor glitches in record-keeping here and there, problems which reportedly were quickly fixed. Like the one in the video store near Albany, where late fees somehow got calculated back to 1900, and its computers showed total late charges of over $91,000 outstanding.
Only 91,000, not so bad. Okay, joining us again is technology expert and CBS Sunday Morning correspondent David Pogue. David, did you have any late fees you had to worry about? Anything you need to tell us about?
Yeah, mine were only like 85,000 per tape.
85,000. All right, I have to ask you, you already teased the fact that you didn't want to work overnight. Where were you as the clock struck midnight, and what was everyone's reaction?
Well, it was New Year's Eve,
yep.
And so I would say the Y2K potential bug added just a frisson of added drama to the whole affair. But generally, it was just a regular New Year's Eve. I believe we went to one of those alcohol-free first night family events downtown. It was a good time.
Well, I can tell you, I was standing in Times Square because that's what you do in local news. You stand in Times Square. And I had the thought that you had only after the fact. It was pretty exciting, the year 2000, without the Y2K, you know, the new millennium. Although I wanted to check with you, is there a distinction? Remember when they said, well, 2000 isn't the next century? Did we get a ruling on that? Remember, I thought we had to get to 2001. Am I wrong about that?
You are correct. That was not the beginning of the new millennium. If you think about it, time began, as we measure it, at year 0. So the first year of life was called year 0. We weren't 1 year old until a year later. So technically, the new millennium began a year later.
All right. You see, and that's why I would only ask you that question, because I dare say I don't think anybody else knows the answer. So after everything went off, I'm like, oh, great, I don't have to work. Everything's in place here. I don't have to work. But the question is, and I don't know if this is the right question, looking back, what do you think? How did people misread everything? How did everybody think, oh, gee, the world is going to come to an end, et cetera, and so forth?
I mean, I think there were two things at play in public reaction and even reporter reaction. One is that technology itself is scary. If we don't understand something, and we do, I mean, think of how people are afraid of robots and AI and self-driving cars. I mean, people are afraid of the unknown as a general rule, probably a good general survival evolutionary trait. So we're scared of that in the first place. Second of all, there's just enough logic. You know, those lazy programmers used only 2 digits to represent the year instead of 4, that we would go, I understand this. So the fear of the unknown, the fear of technology is one thing. And the other thing is, as a human species, we tend to react more to sudden, dramatic dangers, a lion leaping out at us, than long-range dangers. That's why we're so bad at prepping for known long-term threats like climate change or stopping smoking or working out and getting good exercise or saving for the future, and much more attuned to immediate threats like the world is going to end tomorrow. So I think those two things played a big factor in hyping us up.
Ain't that the truth? And have we really learned anything since then? I mean, we always say that we've learned something, but of course not.
We have learned nothing. We're doing the same thing today because we're people.
That's it. Yeah, and we just keep doing it over and over again. David Pogue, it's been a delight to talk to you. And by the way, David, if you didn't know this, I mean, he's on CBS Sunday Morning, and you have a way of explaining things to the average person, just like you did now, and we all understand it. I love when you get in an interview and you're like, no, could you please speak English? You never have that problem with David Pogue, and that's why we love you. We really appreciate you coming on.
Well, I blush. Thank you.
Okay, and we look forward to your next piece on CBS Sunday Morning. And thank you for watching A Look Back. You can see more episodes on our website, cbsnewyork.com. I'm Dick Brennan. We'll see you next time.